This curiosity became the heart of Albert's character. He was not satisfied with simple answers. He always wanted to ask more questions and dig deeper. For example, most children would be happy just knowing that the compass needle pointed north. But Albert wanted to know why. This is what made him different. His story teaches us something important. Sometimes, asking questions is more powerful than simply memorizing facts. From the very beginning of his life, we can already see the qualities that would later make Albert Einstein a genius. He was slow to speak, but he was quick to think. He was different from other children, but his differences became his strength. And with the simple gift of a compass, a lifelong journey of curiosity had begun. As Albert grew older, it was time for him to start school. But school was not a happy place for him. In those days, schools in Germany were very strict. Teachers wanted students to memorize lessons word by word. Children were not encouraged to ask questions. They were expected to sit quietly, listen, and repeat what the teacher said. This style of learning did not suit Albert at all. He wanted to understand things, not just memorize them. He wanted to ask, "Why is this true?" or "How does this really work?" But when Albert asked too many questions, his teachers became angry. He thought he was being difficult or disrespectful. One of his teachers even told him harshly, "You will never be successful in life." Imagine hearing such words as a child. Many students would feel broken after hearing that. But Albert did not stop being curious. Even though he struggled with subjects like languages and memorizing long texts, he discovered one subject that made him happy: mathematics. For Albert, numbers were not boring, they were exciting. He saw math as a special language, the language of the universe. To him, solving a math problem was like solving a puzzle or playing a game. His family noticed this passion. His uncle Jacob especially helped him. Jacob was very good at math and explained things to Albert in a fun way. He would say, "Mathematics is like a treasure hunt. Every problem is a clue that leads you to the solution." This playful way of teaching made Albert love math even more. Instead of feeling like schoolwork, math felt like an adventure. Albert's mother, Pauline, also supported him in another way. She loved music and encouraged Albert to play the violin. At first, Albert didn't enjoy practicing. He found it boring and difficult. But slowly, he began to feel the beauty of music. Playing the violin became a way for him to relax and clear his mind. Later in life, whenever he felt stuck with a scientific problem, he would often pick up his violin and play. It helped him think more clearly. Although Albert was not like other children, he had a very rich inner world. While other kids were busy playing games outside, Albert often preferred to stay alone, reading books or imagining how the universe worked. He liked to read stories about famous scientists, and he dreamed about making his own discoveries one day. One day, while walking home from school, Albert asked himself a question that might sound strange to us. What would it be like to ride on a beam of light? Imagine that, a little boy thinking about something so big and mysterious. This question stayed with him for many years. Later in life, it became the starting point for one of his greatest discoveries about light, space, and time. Even though school was hard for him, Albert never stopped thinking. His curiosity gave him energy, and his love for math and music gave him balance. These early years shaped him into someone who saw the world differently. Instead of simply accepting things as they were, Albert wanted to know the deeper truth. When Albert was around 15 years old, his life became more difficult. His father's business, which dealt with electrical equipment, failed. The family could no longer afford to live in Germany, so they decided to move to Italy to start fresh. This was a hard time for Albert. He had to stay behind in Germany to finish school, while his parents and sister moved away. Being separated from his family made Albert feel very lonely. He didn't like the strict German schools, and now without his family near him, he felt even more unhappy. His teachers were harsh, and they did not understand his way of thinking. The school focused only on memorizing rules and facts, but Albert wanted to ask questions and think freely. This created constant conflict between him and his teachers. One day, a teacher told him, "It doesn't matter if you stay here or not, you will never achieve anything." These words hurt Albert deeply, but at the same time, they made him realize something important. This system of education was not right for him. He began to think that maybe he didn't need school to learn. Finally, Albert made a bold decision. He left school without finishing it. For most people, this would have been a disaster. In society, people believed that without a proper school diploma, you could not succeed in life. Friends and relatives thought Albert had ruined his future. But Albert didn't care what people thought. He believed that true learning did not depend only on classrooms or teachers. He believed he could learn on his own. So he began to study independently. He read books on science, mathematics, and philosophy. He chose subjects that interested him and skipped the things that didn't. For example, he was not very good at languages or history, but when it came to physics and math, he studied for hours with great excitement. At the age of 16, Albert wrote his very first scientific paper. It was about how light behaves. The paper was not perfect, but it showed his growing talent and his unique way of thinking. Imagine a teenager, without finishing school, writing about the mysteries of light. That tells us how passionate and curious he was. Later, Albert decided he wanted to enter a prestigious school in Switzerland called the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in the city of Zurich. This school was known for being modern and open-minded, very different from the strict German schools. Albert thought it would be the perfect place for him. But when he took the entrance exam,
something surprising happened. He failed. Not because he was bad at science or math. In fact, he did very well in those parts. He failed because he was weak in other subjects, like French and history. This was a big disappointment. Most people would have given up, but not Albert. He told himself, "I will try again." Instead of losing hope, he studied harder, especially in the subjects he found difficult. This showed his determination. He didn't let one failure define him. He believed that failure was only temporary, but passion for learning could last forever. This part of Albert's life teaches us something important. Sometimes society tells us that if we don't follow the usual path, we will not succeed. But Albert proved that passion and self-belief are stronger than rules. Even when everyone thought he had made a mistake by leaving school, he continued learning and kept chasing his dreams. After some time of studying on his own, Albert decided to try again to enter the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, Switzerland. By now, he had improved in the subjects that had caused him trouble earlier, like French. This time, at the age of 17, he passed the exam and was finally accepted. It was a big moment in his life, because now he had the chance to study at one of the best schools in Europe. Life in Switzerland was very different from life in Germany. The schools there were less strict. Instead of only memorizing, students were encouraged to think freely and ask questions. This style of education suited Albert perfectly. He could finally learn in a way that matched his curious and independent mind. At the Polytechnic, he studied mathematics and physics, the two subjects he loved the most. But he was still different from many of his classmates. While most students carefully followed the lectures and notes given by the professors, Albert often skipped classes. Instead, he preferred to read and study on his own. He wanted to explore questions that went deeper than the lessons in the classroom. Some of his professors did not like this. They thought Albert lacked discipline and respect. One professor even told him, "You are a very smart boy, Einstein, but you do not follow the rules." Because of this, many professors did not support him, which would later make it harder for him to find a job. But Albert was not completely alone. At the Polytechnic, he met other students who also loved science. One of them was a young woman named Mileva Maric. She was the only female student in the physics department, which was very rare at that time. Mileva was brilliant, hardworking, and deeply interested in physics, just like Albert. The two of them quickly became close friends, studying together, exchanging ideas, and spending hours discussing scientific theories. Albert once wrote to her in a letter, "Together we will conquer the world of science." Their friendship slowly grew into a relationship, but it was not an easy one. In those days, women in science faced a lot of criticism and prejudice. Many people believed that science was not a place for women, so Mileva often had to deal with unfair treatment. Meanwhile, Albert had his own struggles. Even though he was intelligent,
he was not considered the best student because he often ignored the rules of traditional learning. He continued to think about unusual questions that most people didn't even consider. For example, he asked himself, "What is light? Does it travel like a wave or like particles? What is time? Can time change depending on how fast you move?" These were not normal questions for a student, but Albert couldn't stop himself from thinking about them. Despite his unusual approach, Albert completed his studies. In 1900, at the age of 21, he graduated from the Polytechnic with a degree in physics. It should have been the start of a bright career, but life had more challenges waiting for him. Albert expected to find a job as a teacher or researcher, but his professors did not recommend him because they thought he was rebellious and not disciplined. Without good recommendations, it was very hard for him to get hired. For a while, Albert felt lost and disappointed. Imagine studying for years, graduating, and then being rejected again and again. This was the situation he faced. Still, Albert didn't give up. He believed that somehow, if he kept working hard, opportunities would come. His determination was strong, even when the world seemed against him. After Albert Einstein graduated from the Polytechnic in 1900, he was excited about starting his career as a scientist. He dreamed of becoming a professor or a researcher at a university. But life did not go as he planned. Because some of his professors thought he was undisciplined and rebellious, they did not recommend him for jobs. Without their support, every university rejected his applications. Albert sent out many letters hoping to get work as a teacher, but no one accepted him. This was a very painful time. Imagine studying hard for years, only to face rejection again and again. Albert began to worry about how he would survive. For a while, he took small jobs to earn money, like giving private lessons to students. But these jobs paid very little, and he still struggled financially. Sometimes he even thought he might have to give up his dream of becoming a scientist. Then, in 1902, something unexpected happened. With the help of a friend, Albert got a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. His job was to review applications for inventions and decide if they were truly new or not. At first, this job seemed disappointing. It was not related to physics, and Albert worried that he was wasting his time. He wanted to be in a university, not in an office. But Albert had a special way of turning difficulties into opportunities. He began to call the patent office his thinking lab.
During this period, Albert's personal life also changed. In 1903, he married Mileva Maric, the woman he had studied with at the Polytechnic. They had a simple wedding, and soon after, they welcomed their first child, a son named Hans Albert. Although they loved each other, life was not easy. Albert's salary as a clerk at the patent office was small. The family lived in a tiny apartment and struggled with money. Some of Albert's friends told him, "Maybe you should forget about science and focus on your office job. At least it is stable." But Albert refused to give up on his passion. He once said, "I would rather struggle for my passion than live comfortably without purpose." This shows how deeply he valued curiosity and learning over comfort.
Even though he was far from the world of famous scientists, Albert continued to work in silence. He wrote down bold new ideas, often questioning the traditional theories that had existed for centuries. He believed that the universe worked in ways people had not yet discovered, and he was determined to find the truth. It was in this quiet period, in his small office in Bern, that Albert was preparing for the biggest breakthrough of his life. Nobody around him could have guessed that this young man, working as a simple clerk, was about to change the future of science. The year 1905 became the most important year in Albert Einstein's life. Today, scientists call it his miracle year, or, in Latin, annus mirabilis. At this time, Albert was only 26 years old, still working at the patent office in Bern. He was not a professor, he had no fancy laboratory, and very few people even knew his name. Yet, in that single year, he published a series of scientific papers that completely changed the way we understand the universe. The first paper was about something called the photoelectric effect. Albert explained that light is not only a wave, as most scientists believed, but also acts like tiny packets of energy called photons. This was a revolutionary idea. Years later, this discovery would win him the Nobel Prize in Physics. But in 1905, it was just the beginning of people realizing how bold his thinking was. His second paper was about a strange phenomenon called Brownian motion. If you look under a microscope, you can see tiny particles in water moving in random directions. Many people had seen this before, but they didn't know why it happened. Albert proved that this movement was caused by atoms, which at that time some scientists still doubted even existed. His explanation convinced the scientific world that atoms were real. His third paper was the one that truly made history. It was called the Special Theory of Relativity. In it, Albert introduced the idea that time and space are not fixed. Instead, they are relative, which means they can change depending on how fast you move. Imagine two people, one standing still and one traveling very fast in a spaceship. According to Albert's theory, time would move differently for each of them. This was a shocking idea, something that no one had ever imagined before.
From this theory came his most famous equation, shows that energy and matter are connected. In simple words, it means that a tiny amount of matter can be turned into a huge amount of energy. At first, people didn't understand how powerful this idea was. Later, it became the foundation for nuclear energy, both for electricity and, sadly, for atomic bombs. All of these papers were published in the same year, while Albert was still working full-time at the patent office. Imagine that, a young man living in a small apartment with no official position in the scientific world, suddenly producing ideas that shocked the greatest scientists of his time. At first, many people did not believe him. His ideas were too strange and too new. But slowly, scientists began to realize that he was right. Step by step, his work started to spread across Europe. People began to say, "There is a man in Bern who thinks differently. His name is Albert Einstein." This year changed everything for him. From being an unknown clerk, he became a rising star in the world of physics. It was the beginning of his journey to becoming one of the most famous scientists in history. After 1905, Albert Einstein's life began to change. His scientific papers were so original and groundbreaking that scientists across Europe started to notice him. The quiet clerk from the patent office was no longer unknown. People began inviting him to give lectures and offering him teaching positions at universities. In 1909, Albert finally left the patent office and became a professor at the University of Zurich. For the first time, he was officially recognized as a scientist. This was a dream come true for him, but it was also just the beginning. Soon after, he received invitations to teach at other respected universities, including in Prague and later back in Zurich. Everywhere he went, his reputation grew. By this time, Albert was becoming famous for his unique way of thinking. He was not like other professors. He didn't dress formally or care about appearances. He often wore old clothes, his hair was untidy, and he never tried to look important. Students loved him for this. They felt comfortable around him because he spoke simply and explained complex ideas in a way that was easy to understand. Albert continued his research. He was not satisfied with just the special theory of relativity. He wanted to go further and create a theory that explained gravity in a new way. For years, he worked tirelessly on this problem, often walking alone for hours, lost in thought. Sometimes, while playing his violin, he would suddenly stop and write down an idea that had come to him. Music and science were deeply connected in his life. While his professional life was improving, his personal life was more difficult. His marriage to Mileva Maric was under stress. They had 2 sons, Hans Albert and Edward. But financial struggles and Albert's growing fame created distance between them. Albert was often busy with work and travel, while Mileva felt left behind. Slowly, their relationship weakened, and their marriage became unhappy.
Still, Albert's scientific reputation continued to rise. By 1914, he was offered a prestigious position at the Prussian Academy of Sciences in Berlin, Germany. It was one of the highest honors a scientist could receive, and he accepted the offer. Moving to Berlin meant greater freedom and resources to focus only on research. However, the move also made his marriage with Mileva worse, and they eventually separated. At the same time, the world outside was changing. In 1914, World War I broke out. Many scientists in Germany supported the war and signed documents encouraging it. But Albert refused. He believed in peace and spoke against the war, even when it made him unpopular. He thought that science should bring people together, not divide them. Despite the difficult times, Albert kept working on his ideas. For years, he struggled with the question of gravity and space. Finally, in 1915, after countless hours of thought and calculation, he presented his general theory of relativity. This theory explained that gravity is not just a force between objects, as Isaac Newton had described,
but rather a bending or curving of space and time caused by massive objects like stars and planets. It was a revolutionary idea, and it would soon make him world famous. Albert was about to step into the next stage of his life, one where he would no longer be known only by scientists, but by the entire world. In 1915, Albert Einstein finally completed his general theory of relativity, the work he had been struggling with for almost 10 years. He presented it in Berlin to other scientists, but at first, many people were unsure. The ideas were so new and so complex that only a few truly understood them. Albert's theory said that gravity is not an invisible force pulling objects like Newton had explained, but rather a bending or curving of space and time caused by massive objects like stars and planets. It was a revolutionary idea, and it would soon make him world famous. For years, his theory remained unproven. Then, in 1919, something extraordinary happened. There was a total solar eclipse, and a British astronomer named Sir Arthur Eddington led an expedition to test Einstein's predictions. According to Einstein, light from distant stars passing near the sun should bend because of the sun's massive gravity. The eclipse gave scientists a chance to observe this, since the sun's light would be blocked, making the stars visible. When Eddington and his team examined the photographs of the eclipse, they found that Einstein was right. The light from the stars had bent exactly as his theory predicted. This was the proof the world had been waiting for. Overnight, Albert Einstein became a global celebrity. Newspapers around the world printed headlines like "Revolution in Science" and "Newton Overthrown." For the first time, ordinary people who knew nothing about physics began to recognize his name. Photographers followed him, newspapers asked for interviews, and magazines printed his picture. He became the symbol of genius, the man who could understand the mysteries of the universe. His wild, untidy hair and kind, thoughtful eyes made him even more memorable. Albert, however, remained humble. When a reporter asked him how he felt about suddenly becoming so famous, he smiled and said, "It is not the fame that matters, but the truth." He cared more about ideas than attention. This recognition also brought him many honors. He was invited to speak in countries across Europe and later in America. Universities gave him awards, and kings and leaders wanted to meet him. Yet even with all this attention, Albert continued to live simply. He still loved to play the violin, take long walks, and think quietly about new problems in science. At the same time, Albert also became more outspoken about peace. After seeing the destruction of World War I, he believed that scientists had a duty to use knowledge for the good of humanity, not for war. He gave speeches calling for international cooperation and warned against nationalism. This made him respected not only as a scientist, but also as a moral voice in a troubled world. The success of the general theory of relativity turned Albert Einstein into more than just a scientist. He became a cultural icon, a symbol of human intelligence and curiosity. But with fame came new challenges, and the next part of his life would test both his mind and his character. After 1919, Albert Einstein's life was never the same again. The confirmation of his general theory of relativity had made him one of the most famous people in the world. Everywhere he went, crowds gathered to see him. His name was known not only among scientists, but also among ordinary people, journalists, and politicians. In 1921, Albert traveled to the United States for the first time. When he arrived in New York, he was welcomed like a hero. Thousands of people came to greet him. Bands played music, reporters surrounded him, and even the mayor of New York gave him a warm welcome. This was unusual for a scientist. Normally, fame like this was given to kings, actors, or sports stars, not to a man who spent his days writing equations on paper. But Einstein had become a symbol of human intelligence, and people wanted to see the genius in person.
During this trip, he also visited universities, gave lectures, and spoke about the importance of science and peace. But the trip was not only about science. Albert also wanted to help raise money for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, which was being planned in Palestine. He strongly supported education for Jewish people, believing that knowledge and learning were the keys to a better future. In the same year, Einstein received the greatest recognition a scientist could get, the Nobel Prize in Physics. Interestingly, the prize was not for his famous theory of relativity, which many scientists still found too strange at the time. Instead, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his explanation of the photoelectric effect, one of his earlier discoveries. This showed how wide his contributions were. He had changed both the smallest scale of science, light and atoms, and the largest, the universe itself. With fame, however, came challenges. Not everyone admired him. Some scientists continued to criticize his ideas, and in Germany, political tensions were rising. After World War I, the country was unstable, and groups that opposed Jews became louder. Because Albert was Jewish and also spoke openly for peace, some people attacked him with harsh words and even threats. Despite this, he never stayed silent. He believed that scientists had a responsibility to stand up for truth and justice. Einstein also continued to travel. In the 1920s, he visited France, England, Japan, and Palestine. Everywhere he went, people celebrated him. In Japan, huge crowds waited just to catch a glimpse of him. And in Palestine, he laid the foundation stone for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, a moment that filled him with pride. But while the world admired him, Albert remained the same simple man. He did not enjoy luxury. He preferred wearing old clothes, and he continued to play the violin whenever he could. For him, music was not just a hobby. It was a way to relax his mind, and sometimes even to inspire new ideas. By the end of the 1920s, Albert was not only the most famous scientist in the world, but also one of the most influential voices for peace and education. Yet darker times were coming. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were rising to power. Their hatred of Jews and their aggressive nationalism would soon force Albert to make a life-changing decision. By the early 1930s, life in Germany was becoming dangerous for Albert Einstein. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had risen to power. They spread hatred against Jews and blamed them for Germany's problems. Since Albert was Jewish and also a public figure who spoke for peace, he became one of their main targets. Newspapers attacked him, his house was searched, and posters even threatened his life. In 1933, while Einstein was traveling in America, Hitler officially became the leader of Germany. Friends warned Albert not to return home. The Nazis had already taken over his property and declared him an enemy of the state. With a heavy heart, Einstein decided he could never live in Germany again, the country where he had built his career. He resigned from the Prussian Academy of Sciences and gave up his German citizenship. Later that year, he accepted a position at Princeton University in the United States. This would become his new home for the rest of his life. In Princeton, Einstein found peace and freedom to work, but he was deeply saddened by what was happening in Europe. He saw many Jewish scientists, writers, and ordinary families being forced to flee their homes. He helped as many of them as he could, writing recommendation letters and raising money to support refugees. In America, Einstein continued his scientific research, but he also became more active in politics and social issues. He spoke strongly against racism in the United States, especially the unfair treatment of African Americans. He believed that discrimination anywhere was wrong, no matter who suffered from it. Then, in 1939, as World War II was about to begin, Einstein faced a difficult situation. Some scientists told him that Germany might be trying to build a powerful new weapon using nuclear energy. Fearing what could happen if Hitler had such a weapon, Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin R. Roosevelt, warning him of this danger. This letter influenced the start of the Manhattan Project, which later created the atomic bomb. But Einstein himself did not work on the bomb, and when the United States dropped it on Japan in 1945, killing thousands of people, he was deeply troubled. He said, "If I had known, I would not have signed the letter." For the rest of his life, he spoke against nuclear weapons and urged world leaders to choose peace instead of war. In his later years, Einstein became more than just a scientist. He was a symbol of wisdom and humanity. He received countless awards, met world leaders, and continued to inspire young people. Yet he remained humble. He lived a simple life in Princeton, walking to the university, playing his violin, and spending quiet time thinking. Albert Einstein passed away in 1955 at the age of 76. Even in his final days, he was still writing and working on new ideas. He left behind not only great scientific theories, but also a powerful message about peace, equality, and the importance of imagination. Today, his name is still remembered around the world. When people say Einstein, they think of intelligence, creativity, and curiosity. His theories continue to shape modern science, and his words continue to inspire people to dream, to question, and to work for a better future.
Welcome to this story that will not only inspire you, but also help you improve your English. Today, we will start learning about the life of Albert Einstein, one of the greatest thinkers in history. As you listen, try to notice new words and phrases. Remember, this is not only about learning English, but also about learning how curiosity and persistence can help us achieve great things. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879, in a small town in Germany called Ulm. His family was ordinary. His father's name was Hermann Einstein. He worked with electrical parts and ran a small business. His mother's name was Pauline. She was a homemaker, which means she took care of the house and family. Pauline loved music and learning. She often played the piano, and later she encouraged Albert to learn music too. When Albert was born, nothing seemed very special about him. In fact, his family noticed something unusual. His head was bigger than normal. They even joked about it, wondering if he would grow up to be a normal child. Of course, they had no idea that this quiet little boy would one day change the world. Albert was not like other children. He was very slow to speak. Most children begin to say their first words around the age of 1, But Albert did not speak until he was almost 3 years old. This worried his parents a lot. They even wondered if something was wrong with him. Some relatives called him the quiet one because he rarely spoke, even when other children were talking and laughing around him. But Albert was not quiet because he was weak or slow. He was quiet because he was always thinking. He had a very deep and curious mind. He would sit for long periods just watching the world around him, as if he was trying to understand how things worked. This silence was not a weakness. It was the beginning of a very powerful way of thinking. When Albert was 5 years old, something happened that changed his life forever. His father gave him a small gift, a simple compass. A compass is a small tool with a needle that always points north, no matter how you turn it. Albert was fascinated. He kept turning the compass in different directions, but the needle always pointed in the same way. He asked himself, why? How does it know where north is? This tiny object became a mystery to him. Albert stared at it for hours. He wondered about the invisible force that moved the needle. He could not see it, but it was always there. Later, Albert said that this experience left a deep and lasting impression on him. It was the first time he realized that there are unseen forces in the universe, and he wanted to spend his life discovering them.